Rabbeisai, we're back with Hashavas Aveida returns. Hashavas Aveida, take 2. Let's do this. Okay, so we discussed last week, just do a very quick recap. We discussed that if you find an item which is placed in a safe place, don't pick it up. We said that if you find an item that is placed in a super public place, so the guy probably, gave it up. He probably abandoned it there, and therefore you're allowed to keep it. If an item is placed in a semi-safe place, so then it depends on the item. If it doesn't have a siman, then leave it there because maybe the owner is going to come back and get it. And if it does have a siman, then pick it up and you return it to the owner. If you find it that it was what we call dark nefila, it looks like it fell from the person, so there you're going to pick it up no matter what. And you are going to return it to the person with simanim. If there is no simanim, you're going to hold it until Eliyahu Hanavi comes. And if there's simanim, you're going to announce the simanim as we will discuss later. Now, what happens, there are going to be certain cases, I should say, where you do not have a chiyuv of returning it. And sometimes you won't have to bother, depending on which heter it is. Sometimes you're not going to have to bother picking it up in the first place. But if you pick it up, you'll have to hold it to Eliyahu Hanavi, which we discussed most of those last week. And there are certain cases that you actually are allowed to keep. And the main case of being allowed to keep, or pretty much the only case of being allowed to keep this item that that fell, is when there was yish. If there was yish already on the item, which means that the owner was in despair, the owner gave up, doesn't expect to find the item anymore, now it is ownerless, akin to hefker, not exactly hefker, but similar enough to hefker, and therefore if you pick it up, guess what? Congratulations! You got a new item, and you will be allowed to keep it. So Lemaisa, this let's discuss. So what is this example of these examples when you could expect that there is yish? Where do we know and where do we expect that there is going to be yish? So one example, the problem is very simple of not knowing when there's going to be yish is, you have an item there. Mr. Item, was anybody miyayish yet? I don't know. There's how do you know? You can't ask the item. Ask the owner. Well, the owner's not there usually, so you can't ask the owner. You can't. If you can't ask the owner, you can't ask the item. How do you know if there's yish? There's no way of knowing if there's yish, right? So what do? So if you have 2 boxes checked, then you would be allowed to keep it. If it is an item that you could assume somebody would be miyayish in that scenario, number 1. And number 2 is it's a scenario that you could assume the person knows already, and he was already miyayish by the time you found it. Because if somebody picked it up before there was yish, then the yish will be ineffective to allow the finder to keep it. Because yish only makes an item ownerless if the finder didn't already take it into his rishus and has the chiyuv of returning it. But once the finder already picked it up, and now he has the chiyuv of returning it, yish by the loser will be ineffective to make the item be transferred to the finder, and the finder will still have to return it. So once again, the 2 criteria necessary is you have to be able to assume the person was miyayish, number 1, and number 2 is you have to know that he knows about it. Now once again, as we said, usually nobody's here. How do you know? How is one meant to say that? How am I supposed to assume that he was miyayish, and how am I supposed to know that he was miyayish? So the first case possibility is that's pretty simple. You heard the guy say, I can't believe it. I lost my watch, my favorite watch. I'm never going to get it back. Yeah, you heard the guy was miyayish. And 10 minutes later, you notice in the corner on the floor a watch. And the guy was like, my Movado watch. I lost my Movado watch. You pick up the watch. Movado. Like, okay, I guess I can keep this watch, right? So that is one example of being able to keep it, because you know he was miyayish, and you know he knows about it, because you heard him talk about it. So that's one example.
And not
Not a very common example.
No, but not always that also considered a use. Sometimes people just get upset, oh, it's going to be, but in theory, really inside his heart, he's still not Messiah.
A case that the person assumes that he's not going to get it back. This is the Chiddush. You ready? Even if he says he doesn't give up in looking to find it, but if he's assuming that he's not going to get it back, in halacha it's called a yish. Okay. Case number two, reason to assume is like this. If the item has clearly been there for a long time, it's already rusty, it's filled with dust, and it's not a construction site that took 3 seconds to get there. There's a spider web around it. Sometimes you can just tell that this item's been there for a long time. However it is, just, I don't know, you feel it, you get it. So if the item feels like it's been there for a long time, so you could assume he knows about it. Right? And furthermore, also you could assume that he was miyash, because he probably gave up on getting it back if it's been missing for so long. Next, if the item was found amongst goyim, so even if it's an item that's probably came from a Jew, but it's found amongst goyim, we could assume the guy is miyash. He knows that goyim generally do not do Hashavas Aveida, and therefore he has no reason to assume it's going to get back. So you're walking in a non-from area, a non-Jewish area, let's call it, and you see a bag that has some meat. It's in a Glotmart bag. Yeah, Glotmart, Evergreen, Gourmet Glot. Pick your supermarket from your local from supermarket. So it's clearly meat from Gourmet Glot. And it's in a place that's mostly goyim. So you can assume that the owner was miyash. Why? Because it's going to be found by a guy. It's true that a guy may never buy steak from Gourmet Glot, but he sure knows how to eat it. So therefore you could assume that there was yish. So that's the next example. Now an exception to Shinastalach Manayin, maybe, let's say it had the right amount of seals, that it was okay. So it's not always a problem. Without getting involved, opening up that sugya, and without getting too involved in the example, but it's not necessarily a problem. Next point is that, there's an exception to this rule, however. If the item that you found was an item that only a Jew would be interested in, then the Jew would not be miyash. So even if it was in a not from area, and you see a bag from your local farm store, and it has in there a pair of tzitzis. So there we don't assume that the owner's miyash, because it's true it's a Goyish neighborhood, but the Goyim aren't interested in a pair of tzitzis. So I'm assuming a Jew is going to be the one to pick it up, and if the Jew picks it up, then he will return it. But once again, generally in a Goyish area, there will be yish. Okay. Now, that's fine. I can know that a person would be miyash, but how do I know that the person already knows about it in order to have been miyash? Because you have to know it to be miyash. So one item, for example, is a heavy item. And heavy item, we assume that a person realizes that he lost the heavy item. So if you find a hammer, we assume he chapped that he dropped his hammer already, and therefore you'd be allowed to keep it. Or the other very famous example is money. That if we find money, there's a concept of Chazal tell us that people are often checking their pockets to see if they have money or not. And therefore, when they check their pockets to see if their money is in their pockets, they were going to realize shortly after dropping it. And therefore, they know that they lost it. Therefore, by the time you found it, we can assume the person knew that he lost it. There was yish already, because he doesn't expect to get his money back, and you could keep it. And the place can say this apply. Oh, one thing interesting. Rav Elyashiv says, very interesting svara. Rav Elyashiv says this only applies to 50 shekel or more. If you have a couple of shekel, a 20 shekel bill in your pocket, people aren't always checking their pockets to make sure that they have their 20 shekel. So it has to be 50 shekel or more. Now, I don't know how many years ago Rav Elyashiv said this 50 shekel. I mean, he hasn't been alive. Put it this way, the Yosef Shaloms are all going to have started getting bar mitzvah already. So he was nifter at least 13 years ago. So I don't know when he said this exactly. Probably 25 years ago. I imagine the 50 shekel of Rav Elyashiv is probably 200 shekel today. But I'm not positive. I can't say that with certainty. I don't know exactly what year he said 50. Once again, 200 shekel, you're nervous that you're checking. Do I still have my 200 shekel? 20 shekel, you're not checking if you still have your 20 shekels. So Zot Rav Elyashiv only applies 200 shekel and above. Or he said 50, but I'm guessing that means 200. But I'm not positive exactly.
Everyone is
Yeah. So once again, we don't know who lost it. We're the finders. So we have to judge by the hamonam, the general public. And the general public, 200 shekel that you care about. 100 shekel, maybe not as much. Okay.
Interesting. Gemara Musgar, Rabbi Yashiv says also 50 shekel on matonas levyonim.
Aha, interesting.
Yeah, that's also the same idea that there should be tzurch su'uda.
Something chashiv.
Chashiv, not stand just 10 shekel.
Very good.
Shekel, so maybe that's the thing.
Yeah, maybe. Reb Moshe and the Chazon Ish, they both say, once again, Rav the Poskim do not go with Rav Elyashiv, and they say any amount of money that you find, you could keep. And that's the accepted klal in the Poskim. Any amount of money that you find, you could keep. Reb Moshe and the Chazon Ish, they both say that even though apparently people don't seem to be checking their pockets every 10 seconds, every 2 minutes anymore. Apparently it's just not the Metzias anymore. People aren't checking their pockets. Yokter Moshe and the Chazon Ish, the halacha stands. And it could work with like a Kain Hefker, Bezdin Hefker type of idea that Bezdin has the right to take that money, even though you maytain it, you really aren't allowed to keep it anymore. But if Chazal said you could keep it when you find money, you could still keep it, even though people might not check their pockets nowadays. Which is quite an interesting chiddush from the Chazon Ish and Rav Elyashiv. Interesting point, and this is very, very pertinent. This din of we expect that you're always checking your money for valuables, the place can apply this to valuables as well, not just to money, I should say. So anything valuable, we assume that the owner knows that he lost it, there is yish, and therefore you can keep it. It's actually, the irony ends up with a halacha that's very different than a lot of people behave. A lot of people buy an item that's not so expensive, feel like they don't have to do Hashavas Aveida. An item that's very expensive, they feel like they do have to do Hashavas Aveida. But in a way, it's kind of the opposite. Because on the expensive item, Chazal tell us they have already yish. They expect not to get it back, and they know that they lost it.
For example, a tachshit or
a ring, a diamond ring. Yeah, a diamond ring. So the person's going to know that they lost it, and they're going to be miyash. Once again, it could be depending on simanim, etc. Without simanim, let's talk about without simanim. A very standard ring. So once again, it's going to be very, I think actually rings, diamonds, I'm not a very big mumcha in this, but I think they're registered in some diamond registry or something like that when you own a certain size diamond and up or something like that. I'm not sure about that. That might already count as a simon. But let's just talk about a basic thing of jewelry, a nice bracelet, a nice non-diamond ring, a nice whatever. If it's a very miyuchadik shape or whatever, maybe it could be a simon. But a classic standard, oval shaped, pear shaped, heart shaped, whatever, and there's nothing so specific about it, and it's not missing the 6th diamond on the right over there, but it really has all the diamonds inside, the chayr, those have no simon. And those has no simon, they're valuable, we assume the person knows about it, we assume they're miyayish, and therefore the finder could actually keep it, which is going to be surprising to a lot of people. Now, I have just a question on this concept. This concept that we say, we expect that the person knows they lost it. If they always know they lost it, so they would have picked it up. So obviously, they're not checking every 1 second. We expect that in the time frame when they lost it, they didn't check right away. But a minute, 2, 3 minutes later, 5 minutes, I don't know exactly, they did check. And we're assuming that when you found it, it was after that time. So let's say we're going to say that standard ring. You see it full of somebody's finger, and you pick it up right away, and they didn't check their finger, and in the interim, then in that case you would have to return it. Fine. Very good. One more time, another case when you could assume they know about it is, as we said before, if the item was lost for a long time, then you could assume they know about it. Stam, I have a interesting question nowadays. I feel like there's a lot of times a relatively small item that somebody lost, they never even chop that they lost it. I don't know how true this is in the Metzias nowadays. Just because the item was lost for a long time, there's a baseball cap that's on the next to the sports field, next to the basketball court. There's a baseball cap. And it's been there for 3 weeks already. Does the guy for sure know that he lost it? I feel like he doesn't for sure know he lost it. Obviously, it depends who we're talking about. But I don't feel like people necessarily now for sure know they lost it. Because, whatever, they have 6 other ones at home. And they just picked a different one the next time. And maybe they don't know. Yeah. But the Maisa, I think we're allowed to go with Chazal. And they say if it's been there for a long time, you could assume the guy knows. Fine. And therefore, once again, once there's been years, you're allowed to keep it. And once again, if you don't want to keep it and you want to just leave it there, you're allowed to just leave it there also. Not a problem. Fine. What about in these cases where there is a simon, so I should put it this way. In all these cases that there is a simon, but you're allowed to keep it, because we could assume that there's yish, right? With the simon. The Shulchan Aruch encourages us to go with Nim Mishur Sadin and return it. And pretty much presents it in a way like you kind of have to go with Nim Mishur Sadin. Now that statement of kind of have to go with Nim Mishur Sadin is a little bit of an oxymoron. If it's with Nim Mishur Sadin, then by definition I don't have to do it. And if I have to do it, it's not with Nim Mishur Sadin. Like, how does that work? So it seems like it's highly advisable of Nimashur Sadin to return the item with a simon, even though there's been yish. Now, if there was not yish, then if there's not a simon, I should say that I meant the wrong thing. If there's not a simon, then you're not going to be able to. Then you're not really encouraged to give it back, because give it back to who? The guy that says that he's the owner, Mechatesi is the owner. So when you learn the sugya, that sounds great, and from the sugya, I agree 100%. But then I started thinking about this in reality, and I got very bothered. Why did I get very bothered? Because imagine this: you're at some Pesach program, right? And you find a big diamond ring, right? Outside of the registry thing, which I'm not so sure about, whatever. Forget the registry thing. You find a nice big tennis bracelet, yeah? With diamonds galore. Yeah, no simon, because this is the one that's in style. This is what every rich lady in the Pesach program was wearing, because this is what was in style. Yeah? And you find it. And all of a sudden you hear an announcement: if anybody found a tennis bracelet, please return to Mrs. Goldstein. Mrs. Goldstein is missing her tennis bracelet. Right? Now, let's think about this. Is there a simon? No. You kind of know that Mrs. Goldstein's the one that lost the tennis bracelet, right? And it wasn't in the Makom, wasn't a simon, it wasn't in a specific place. But come on, we all know it was Mrs. Goldstein who lost it. But it comes out from the sugya that I don't have any Indian of returning it to her, because how do I know that she's the real owner? It's definitely not a simon. So it ends up in a very strange situation. Lemais, if you want to give it to Mrs. Goldstein, you could. It's very nice of you to give it to Mrs. Goldstein. Zakt Rav Chaim Kanievsky, you have to take off meiser on what you found. Now, we actually only paskin you have to take a meiser when you get a money gift or when you find money, potentially. Because Rav Chaim Kanievsky goes with, he would say you meiser any gift. That's tam his shita in meiser. But I'm saying, he would, in theory, say you have to take a meiser for this. Because it's yours. You're just giving Mrs. Goldstein a present. Something rubs me the wrong way. Because, come on, it's Mrs. Goldstein's. All right? But that's not how the sugya comes out. So what can I tell you? Fine. Now, weiter. Now, the Ramah says, here's another interesting thing. We're talking about a case where there is a siman, but you could assume that there's yish. So we said that there's enough nimshur sedin to return it, even though you don't have to. The Ramah says if the finder is poor and the loser is wealthy, then you don't need to go with nimshur sedin to return it. Once again, halacha doesn't require you to return it. So if this is much more meaningful for me than it is for Mrs. Goldstein. I don't have a tennis bracelet. I'm a poor kol avrich wife who doesn't have a tennis bracelet. Mrs. Goldstein is a wealthy lady with her tennis bracelet. So there's no. I mean, even if there was a simon, There's no expectation or requirement or pressure for me to go with nimshur sedin.
For the poor guy.
For the poor guy. It is a matna shemayim.
But if it's opposite,
Than the nimshur sedin, you don't have to. No, well, the as I said, it's this weird thing, strongly encouraged by the Shulchan Aruch to go with nimshur sedin. Yeah, in the Hanami, but it doesn't say further than that. I'll tell you a story. Some people might not like this story, but that's okay. Shmuel Salant was once walking in the streets of Yerushalayim, and he saw a British nobleman who dropped a expensive coin, fell out of his pocket. A really type of thing that could support a Yerushalmi family for a year. And Shmuel Salant picked it up, and the person next to him said, we didn't discuss this yet, but in terms of returning a Aveida to a Goy, there's a concept of the Shulchan Aruch says, Harizim Meshubach, the one who returns it to a Goy. You don't have a Chiyuv, but if he returns it to the Goy to create a Kiddush Hashem, Harizim Meshubach. So the guy asked for Shmuel Salant, so you're going to return it to him and create a Kiddush Hashem, Harizim Meshubach. So Shmuel Salant said, here, I'll lend you the coin, $20,000 coin. I'll lend you the coin. You return it to the nobleman, and then you owe me $20,000. And all of a sudden, the guy wasn't so interested in doing it. So why should I pay for the Kiddush Hashem? You could pay for the Kiddush Hashem. Now, so what's the vart? What's the vart? At first, the first time you hear this, it kind of throws you the wrong way. So what's the vart? The vart is like this. Shmuel Salant said, I think he was based off, I have a chashash, he was based off of this Ramah. I'm a poor guy, he's a rich guy. Yeah. There's a matna shemayim that showed up here. Meichetesi, that I have to go above and beyond the letter of the law, as a poor guy, to go give the coin to the rich guy. The din, I'm allowed to keep it. So meichetesi, I need to go above and beyond the letter of the law, the letter of the law to help out this rich guy, and therefore I have a chashash that Shmuel Salant was basing that off this Ramah.
And not only that, he could take from this money maisrus, and then he could give money to Yidden.
Correct.
By the way, how come there wouldn't be a problem of lotis choinen?
So that's why it's in lois tzchainin. So I think the vart of why it's not lois tzchainin is because I'm using the money for my own personal use. What's my own personal use that I'm using the money for? Creating a Kiddush Hashem. So I'm not spending Yiddish geld on a guy. I'm using it for personal reasons to create a Kiddush Hashem.
But is it not better to keep it?
So this is what the debate. 100% is what the debate.
It's like Kiddush Hashem.
Correct. Very good. Fine. Next. I just want to point out, and I already implied this, but let's speak this out. If the item was found without knowing if there was yish, and it has no siman, and you don't know if there's yish, so that item you have to hold on to until Eliyahu Hanavi comes. When Eliyahu Hanavi comes, he'll tell you who the real owner is. We'll discuss some other alternatives by the end. Now, an item that we would assume the owner would be miyayish had he known. Had he dropped this, he would have been miyayish. But we have no idea if he knows that he dropped it. So that's the famous sugya of yish lo midas. And we paskin yish lo midas lo have a yish. we want to say tachlis. He doesn't know if he dropped it, and if he doesn't know, and he wasn't actually miyayish, even though he would have been miyayish, but he wasn't, and therefore that item you have to hold on to until Eliyahu Hanavi comes. Fine. An item that's placed in a place that often gets cleared and is not going to last there, that item is assumed to be hefker. So you find all sorts of interesting things next to the garbage dumpster. You could assume the person left it there and they abandoned it, and therefore something next to the garbage you're allowed to keep. Fine. Simanim. So what qualifies as a siman? So this also might throw you off a little bit. What qualifies as a siman? So a siman needs to be, and the Shulchan Aruch says based on Rishonim, it could be either weight, size, amount, but color is not good enough. That is what the Shulchan Aruch says. And when it comes to things like let's say weight or size or whatever, it's only if it is a non-standard amount. I found a dozen eggs. That's not a siman, a dozen eggs. Because they sell eggs by a dozen eggs. Or in Eretz Yisrael, a lot of times they sell a tray of 30 eggs. So if you found, I found some eggs. How much? 30. That's not a siman. Because that's how they sell it. That doesn't mean anything. I found 5 pounds of flour. I found a 2 kilo bag of flour. They sell it that way. If they sell it that way, that is not a siman. Fine. Now, and when it comes to places, by the way, saying I found it in the chutzner, I found it in the courtyard. I lost my item in the courtyard. That's not a siman. A siman is I found it under the third chair on the left over there. That's a siman. A siman needs to be specific, miyuchid, exact, not just like more or less. Even though it's true when the person tells me, hey, you found it? Oh, I lost it in the chutzner. I lost it in the courtyard. I would have thought maybe that would be good enough. Because I'll say no. It has to be very specific. How do I know this is your item, not somebody else who lost their item in the chutzner? So therefore, it needs to be specific. Now, for example, to put this in perspective, I saw in Ray Bodner's Sefer, Halachos of Other People's Money. He gave an example of somebody says, I found a pen. And the guy comes to give a siman. Was it a blue Parker pen? Badr says it's not good enough. There's the Parker company makes hundreds of thousands of blue pens. And if the Parker company makes hundreds of thousands of blue pens, Mechatesi, that this blue Parker pen was the guy who lost it. Maybe it was somebody else's. That's not enough of a siman. I saw Rav Zalman Nechemni goes so far as to say it needs to be, a siman is only if it's a 1 in 1,000 type of thing. If it's a 1 in 1,000 chance, then it could be a siman. If it's a 1 in 10 chance, that's not a siman. Though, I saw a different pasuk that said, I don't remember who it was, 7 keys on a ring is a siman. Now, I don't know if that would stem with the Zalman Nechemni. It doesn't sound like they work together. 7 keys on a ring doesn't, it's one of the options, so to speak. But it could be, since there's no specific number, no specific expectation of how many keys are in a ring, maybe that would count. I'm a little unclear about that point. Okay. Initials, that would be a good siman. Here's another interesting thing that I saw from some of the poskim. Let's say somebody found a standard glove, standard black glove, whether it's cotton, leather, whatever. And then he says, listen, I found the glove. You go to him, okay, here I have the other glove, or a very standard earring. Here I have the other one. Is that the poskim? It's not a siman.
Why?
Because it's a standard glove and it's a standard earring. The company makes hundreds of thousands of those. So if it was the special green one with a blue stripe, it was miyuchid. Even though it's true, the company might make a lot of those. But it's like a 1 in 1,000 pattern of a glove. So we're going to get to maybe a heter of a Talmid Chacham, who's maybe. But but we'll see. Yes. Oh, we discussed that already last week. The yakka included in the Talmud Chacham. So the Aruch HaShulchan says that the Erlich Yeki is as good as the Talmud Chacham in this respect. That then you could trust them. But the implication of Moshe Feinstein and the Poskim by and large is it's not just your average good guy. You have to be above and beyond straight shooter to be able to accept somebody's recognizing the item by just looking at it. Fine. So I heard a Posik say, as I said, that doesn't count as a simon. That's going to be very surprising to a lot of people. I have the other glove! No, but how do we know it's your, could be somebody else lost it. That's standard black glove. Okay. A simon on the container can be a simon, even if, let's say, the money inside the container isn't a simon. So if you have a wallet, for example, and the wallet has your driver's license, which that could be a very good simon in the driver's license. Look, there's a picture of somebody that looks just like me. That's a good simon.
If it doesn't look like him, but the name and everything.
Whatever, if it's clear that that's the person, then that's a good simon. Now, the money inside doesn't have a simon. But yeah, that counts as one unit, and therefore the simon would count. And there's something interesting. The Aruch Shulchan says multiple bad simanim don't add up to be a good simon, which is also an interesting thing. Now, when somebody finds a Aveida without assumed or known Yish, so how are they meant to find the owner? Right? So, what is the process of finding the owner? So once upon a time, there used to be a special place in Yerushalayim where they used to get up by Shlosh Regolim and announce all the lost objects. Now, I don't really understand the Chazal. Because if we think about this, all the Jewish people, we get together, and 3 times a year, so imagine comes, Sukkot. They haven't done this since Shavuos. So they haven't done this for like 4.5 months. Right? And somebody gets up and starts announcing all of the lost objects that anybody found anywhere. Just at a pure practical level, I don't understand that. Especially if they were announcing all these little small items. Pacifier, blue pacifier. Anybody have a simon on a blue pacifier found in New York? Next, we have a glove. This glove was found in Paris. Next, okay, we have a pair of sunglasses in Baghdad. Sunglasses in Baghdad. Anybody? How does this go on? Does it take forever? I just don't understand it. I was thinking maybe they only did it for the very expensive items. Although it kind of doesn't work out, because generally by the very expensive items, you assume there was Yish before you found it, and if you don't have a key of announcing it, there is a Mashur Sadin that maybe you would still announce it, but I started thinking about the process, and it seems very difficult to understand from a pure practical level. Maybe there is something to it that people back in the day had less stuff and took better care of their stuff, and there was less lost items. So maybe that's helpful. But overall, it's pretty strange. Now the Torah says the minhag became that we announce items in shul. And Ramosha asked the question. Ramosha is a very practical, passionate question. You don't know which shul the guy davens in. You found the item on Avenue J in Brooklyn. You don't know which shul the guy davens in. So Dr. Moshe, what, I'm supposed to go announce it in every shul in Brooklyn? There's 200 shuls in Brooklyn. What do you want the guy to do? It's not mistaber that Chazal expected the guy's going to have to run around and announce it in all 200 shuls in Brooklyn. So Dr. Moshe must be, you have to announce it in the local public areas around there. Now that's very hard to qualify. What does that mean? Local public area. How far do you take that? Very hard to understand. So Maisa, the way that we do it is that we put up notices either physically or digitally in the local areas. Now I saw something when I was researching the Shiur. There's a website called Aveida.com. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's a very practical thing. And it also has categories that you could search a category. Jewelry, or for example, clothes. And that would make it very practical. The problem is, I don't know if that many people know about this website. And I hope it gets the public attention that it deserves in order to be able to have a good system for everybody to be able to find the owner. It has location and type of item, and that way you'll be able to narrow it down very quickly, and it's a very practical way of doing it, and hopefully it gets enough publicity that it will be able to be the default, because that would be pretty cool. Fine. The notice should be up for enough time that we can expect that the loser, if he was looking for it, would have already looked for the notice. Now, what is that on a practical level is going to be very difficult to figure out. Now, one is not meant to automatically give back the item to somebody who says, I lost the item. We're meant to be cautious that he's not a fraudster, and we have to make sure that the guy is simanim who we're giving it back to. Now, when someone finds the item, he becomes a shomer for the item. What type of shomer does the guy become? Zakt Rabba, shomer chinam. He's a shomer chinam. What's the lacha shomer chinam? The shomer chinam is chayav and pshia. If he's negligent with the item, he has to pay for it. But Hashavas Aveida, something happens, it gets lost, stolen, not based on negligence, he's off the hook. That is the opinion of Rabbi. Zakt Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says he's a shomer sachar. Not only is he chayav for negligence, but even if it gets stolen or lost where it's not negligence, he still has to pay. If it's at the point where it's honest, there is nothing he could do. So if it's nothing he could do, then he's off the hook also. But anywhere in between negligence and doing nothing, he would have to. Why would he be a shomer sachar? He's getting paid the big bucks in Shemai. He's getting schar. There's real payment over here. Okay, this maybe is machlokes Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef. The Maisa, this machlokes Harry Paskin, says machlokes makes it all the way down to Shulchan Aruch Ramah. This machlokes Zak the Shach and the Sma. They say we treat it like a svika badin, and therefore you can only be mechayev somebody for negligence. You can't be mechayev somebody for gneva v'aveda. Now, Ramosha says, and this is a very disturbing halacha for many people. Ramosha says you can't just pick up an item and put it on the bench where the loser is going to see it. Even though it increases the loser's chance to find the item, to get it back, you still can't do it. You pick it up, you have a chiyuv of returning it. And there's a process. Notices, simanim, and you can't just go and put it back. Now, I find this very difficult because surely there is what we would call a non-sadi. Surely there is, the world bears witness that the owner would prefer you put it back into an easy place as opposed to picking it up and make me run after it. This might, at the end of the day, boil down to what we said before, whether it's a guarded place or a non-guarded place. If it's a place where we're choishish that the item's going to get stolen, you're not allowed to put it back. If it's the type of place where we don't expect the item to get stolen, then perhaps you are allowed to put it back. And a lot of times it's going to depend more on the item than the place. Meaning, if I put a sweater on the bench in Gans soccer, so maybe, this is debatable, I agree, maybe I'm not choishish that somebody's going to steal it. If I put the fancy camera on the bench in Gans soccer, I am choshish that somebody's going to steal it. So it might be dependent on that factor. But once again, this is not particularly clear. Now, to return an item, the finder does not need to incur expenses to return the object. Some very basic expenses like paper and tape to put up a sign, that he has to do. But no real expenses. He doesn't have to do. Furthermore, a person does not need to lose wages to return an item. So if he's a cashier at Osherad and he sees somebody left there 300 shekel roast left on the thing, and I'll have to chase him down to return it, Yeah, but when he does that, he's gonna lose 20 shekel from his work. He does not have to do it. That's the halacha. Now, I'm not saying there wouldn't be a nimishur sedin and a nice guy and a right thing to do. Yeah, there probably would be. But minadin, he does not have to lose wages to perform Hashavas Aveida, because he goes first. What about potential gain? So, poskim say for loss of clear, likely profit, meaning not like, oh, maybe you never know type of gain, but like, I'm in the process of closing a deal. I'm meeting with the client. I'm in the process of closing the deal. You don't have to leave to get busy with Hashavas Aveida. But when it's something that is, what about something that's like, hey, you never know. I'm in sales. I might get a phone call at the office. I might have a customer come in. I might lose money. What about potential gain? But it's not clear likely potential gain, but it's possible. You never know. Could I say I'm not going to do Hashavas Aveida because I'm busy with my own profits, potential profits? So it's very interesting. According to general theoretical logic, the answer is, yeah, that is a theoretical potential loss, and you should be able to push off Hashavas Aveida because of this. However, as the Shulchan Aruch says, if you do this and you live your life with this, you're going to end up getting rid of Hashavas Aveida altogether. There's going to be no Hashavas Aveida left by the time you're done. Because every time, it's always going to be potential gain. Right? And we can't have it that you have no potential. You can't have a Hashavas, that you're never going to do Hashavas Aveida. And therefore, you should still do it, the Hashavas Aveida, by theoretical potential gain. I was thinking, one more thing with this before I tell you what I was thinking. Learning. So we actually do not see a heter. We see a heter for potential wages. Don't have to lose wages. What if you lose a seder? I'm going to lose my learning. So we don't see a heter for that. But once again, I would argue, how could you say the Torah is worth less than work? Mitzad Sheni, the point of Torah is Limana Manas Lasos. You're learning to know how to be a good Yid. And if you're not going to do Hashavas Aveida, then you're missing part of the point of learning, if you're not going to act in mitzvahs. Maybe we could say a little bit like this. If it's an expensive item, yes. Stop, close your Gemara, and return the expensive item. Limana Manas Lasos. You're meant to be a good Yid. And also, I don't care, you might get a customer show up. Listen, go and return the expensive item. You don't have a reason. You're going to just never have a Hashavas Aveida otherwise. But if it's an item that's like, it's not a big deal. Right? So maybe you can make the argument on an item. That's really the item, the idea. My Aveida goes before somebody else's. My wages go before somebody else's. And therefore perhaps my potential profit is going to go before this little item. Or maybe my Seder, which I have the potential gain to say, maybe you can even say that goes before somebody's little item. But for a big item, definitely you can't. I do not have a raya for that. I was just about to say, I don't have a raya for this. This is my own personal netiya. And I'm sure somebody could argue with this, and I'm sure somebody will argue with this. But that's how I see things. But I did just say a chiddush. I did not just say something pashut.
I agree with that. It makes big sense.
Fine. Now, we discussed an item that is found without reason to assume yish. Now, if it has no siman, or it has a siman, but you announced it and you didn't find the owner, so you need to hold it on until Eliyahu Hanavi comes. Now, what about something that will go bad? I'll hold it to Eliyahu Hanavi, these apples, but they're going to be rotten apples. If Eliyahu Hanavi doesn't come tomorrow, we're going to have, rotten apples. Nobody wants rotten apples. What do you do with that? So what you do is you sell those items, and then the money, you hold them to the money you owe to the owner when Eliyahu Hanavi comes. You don't actually have to hold the money in an envelope. You can spend the money. And you owe the money to the owner, and you'll find out who the owner is either when the owner shows up later and says, oh, by the way, 3 weeks ago I lost those apples with the siman over there, whatever. Or maybe he won't come, and then in a month when Eliyahu Hanavi comes, he'll tell you who the real owner was, and you'll pay him.
Yeah, but it's a whole big job to sell the
Ah, so one of the chaps are, because it's a big schlep to sell the apples, is you could sell the apples to yourself. The finder could be the buyer. And therefore, you found these apples that have a simon. You looked for the owner. You didn't find the owner. So instead of, what you could do is, you keep the apples. How much is the apples worth? $5, 20 shekel, whatever. So you mark down you make a Google sheet. And you mark down in the Google sheet, I owe 20 shekel for apples to unknown person. It's the Elio Navi title sheet on your Google sheet or your Excel, whatever you have. And you keep it in the cloud and add to it whenever you need it throughout your life. And that is a very good eitzah.
Then I could eat the apples myself.
And you eat the apples yourself. And Ramosha says the same applies by clothes, by the way. Clothes also go bad. And if you ever saw somebody's clothes in their, old people, in their basement, the clothes from 40 years ago, nobody's going to wear that for two reasons. A, it starts to smell, and B, it's way out of style. So the same thing happens with clothes. And you could sell the clothes or use the clothes, etc. You don't actually have to hold on to it, the Elio Navi. And by the way, this might pay for some small items. Let's say you have one glove. Right? How much is this one glove worth already?
0, because you need 2.
Yeah, but we already said it's considered more than a share of proof, but it's very, very little value. Even to that guy, it's worth very little value, this used glove. So you might want to just throw it out instead of having to hold the Elio Navi and make a tab. I owe this amount to the person. But that, once again, if you have space to put it, it's not a bad thing for somebody, especially if you live in a big house. You have one closet downstairs where on the bottom of the closet you flip the Elio Navi items. That's not a bad thing either. Okay. Now,
what's about
by the way, this idea, Ramosha, Feinstein, Rishonim, Zalman, Erel, Yashiv, all say this is lichatchila, selling the item and writing down that you owe Elio Navi, that is lichatchila. I, by the way, Derek Hagav, have a kasha. If the Elio Navi is going to tell you who the owner is, you don't think Elio Navi could tell you how much you owe them, and you need to keep a Google sheet? So I think you do need to keep the Google sheet to show how much you owe. Because if not, then people are going to get the feeling that you're allowed to keep everything. But once, it's going to be, you're allowed to keep it. The Ramosha says it. Rishonim Zalman says you're allowed to keep it. No, they didn't say you're allowed to keep it. So if you mark it down, then you'll still remember and you'll still chop. The idea is, I owe. And it's not that I'm allowed to keep it. So that's why I think it's still important to write it down on this Google sheet, as I put it.
What's the eitzah with the gemach keren beheshiv? That I don't know who to give it, so I'm giving them money. They use it as a gemach, this money, and then they say that Achuvah Yonavi. Then
I'm not familiar with that. You tell me about it after. I'm not familiar with this gemach. So, okay. If an item takes effort to hold, and the owner probably wouldn't mind if I sold it, so you could sell it. Once again, even if the item is not going to go bad, but it's the item that the owner, it's a pain in the neck to hold. It takes up space, right? And it's the type of thing that the owner is not going to be emotionally connected to that type of item. He wouldn't mind if I sold it. You could sell it, and once again, same shtickle, you could sell it to yourself. Okay. By the way, you're allowed to appoint a replacement shomer. Yeah? Generally, if I'm made a shomer, I'm not allowed to make a replacement shomer. Why? Because there's a svara, maybe the person dafka wanted me to be the shomer, not somebody else. So why could I appoint somebody else? But if I found the item, the person never made me the shomer, so the person never made me the shomer, so there's no problem me making somebody else the shomer. Beautiful. Now, next. By the way, this was something that I was thinking of, a chap. That you could use this, for example, back to Mrs. Goldstein. Right? Now, you could say that I'm not allowed to give the ring back to Mrs. Goldstein. That was a case of when there was expected yish. Let's actually not use the diamond ring. Let's say I found the blue Parker pen. Right? And then the Reuven Schwartz comes and says, I say, put up a sign, found pen. And he says, with a blue Parker pen. I say, that's not a good enough simon. Yeah. He says, I don't know any more simanim to it. And I'm feeling like, I think it was Reuven Schwartz's. Right? But I can't return it to him because but Reuven is positive it's his pen. You got the situation? So I was thinking I could appoint Reuven. Reuven, I'm appointing you the Shemer. And you're gonna owe a blue Parker pen to whoever lost it. And if Reuven decides he wants to do that, l'chayr he could. I was just thinking l'chayr you could do such a chap. And that's another chiddush of mine, and that is debatable. But that's something that I was thinking. Now, what about swapped items? You come back to shul and you see that talis. And you realize, at first you think it's your talis, but then you realize, wait a second, this isn't my talis. So you put up a sign, and your talis is gone. This talis is here, it's on the rack next to the bathroom. You put your talis in the rack, and then you come back and there's a different talis there. And you chop, it's not yours. So what happened? The other guy took your talis, probably, and left you his talis. So what do? Could you take his talis? No, his talis is a lost item. So you take his talis, and you put up a sign. Anybody lost the talis? So if the guy says he lost the talis, great. Or put up a sign, everybody check your talis to make sure it's yours. Whatever happens, a month already happens, nobody reported the talis, and you still have this talis. What could you do? Do you have to buy a new talis now? Or could you keep this guy's talis? So seemingly you can't keep that guy's talis. It's not, why could you keep it? It belongs to the loser. It doesn't belong to you. You're just a shomer.
Yeah, but here's my talis.
So
I could be switching.
Mechetesi. He has no das. I can't, you know what, I don't call it king chalipin, I call it king gzela. So there's no way to get it. So I thought about this chap. What's the chap? Once again, the talis is going to go bad if it's held for who knows how long, right? So what I do is, okay, I'm the shomer of the talis. I sell the talis to myself. For, let's say the talis is $100 new. Used, it's $30, let's say, $20 used is the going rate. So I owe $20 to whoever lost this talis. I continue to use this talis. Comes Elio Navi in a couple months and says, hey, you got to return the talis. The next day, no, it's whatever it is. Yeah. Comes Elio Navi, I want to make it that he used it for a bunch of months. Yeah. Comes Elio Navi and says, you sold the talis and bought the talis, you owe $20 to Yenim. And you ask Elio, do you mind asking Yenim, does Yenim have my talis? And Elio Navi says, Taka, Yenim has your talis. And how much is the talis worth that he took? Probably roughly the same, $20. And okay, fine, there was a good chalipin. Great, let him keep the talis. He doesn't owe me $20, I don't owe him $20. And Shama Yisrael. So that's a good chap. You switched him. But if you do it without this chap, that you bought it from him, that's gezela. But if you use this chap, it's ganz fine.
Who gives this psak?
Once again, a lot of the poskim say Ramosha, Fancy, Shomazam, Yashav say you're allowed to sell the item and you're allowed to sell it to yourself. Who gives this chap that when you find the wrong talis you could do that?
Yeah.
Me. Fine. But I think that already, that I'm confident on. The other things were a little bit of a stretch. This I'm confident you should be allowed to do it. Now, what if you swapped items, umbrella, coat, talis, and you came home from shul, and you look at you're hanging up your coat at home, and you say, uh-oh, this is not my coat. Yeah? So you have to go back. So I'm going back to shul right now to bring the coat back. Could you wear that coat back to shul? It's cold outside. And guess what? You don't have a coat. Because your coat's in shul. You don't have an umbrella because your umbrella's... Could you wear that coat back to shul?
And to leave it there, no?
Yeah, to leave it there. But it's cold outside. Do I have to walk in the cold holding the coat? Or could I wear the coat? So, Zakter Moshe with the Mordike Moshe Dike Chiddush. Because generally a shomer is not allowed to just use the item. Right?
But
so,
that they will let it.
Very good. So Zakter Moshe was Mechaven. And Moshe says there's like a non-sadi or umdana, however you want to put it, that the original owner allows you to wear it back. It's okay for you to wear it back, and you can wear the coat back or the back to shul to go return it. People agree to this. Fine. Interesting chiddush. Rav Moshe, Rav Shlomo Zalman, and Rav Vosner both say an institution has a right to institute their own lost and found policy. So they could say whoever leaves an item here for 30 days, it becomes hefker. Whoever leaves an item here past Thursday afternoon, it becomes hefker. Now you might have thought this is masna mashakos b'Torah, you're making a tanai against the rules of the Torah, but no. Apparently we make a tanai that whoever walks into the building agrees to abide by these conditions, and that works, and it's lechatchila.
For a woman, by the way, could be very sensitive with clothing, because let's say it's a very expensive clothing, so even it's cold, but the woman...
I hear your part.
You understand? So
yeah.
Maybe for a woman...
So yesh l'falpa was that. Okay. Now, once the finder notifies the owner that he has his object, it's the owner's responsibility to pick it up. The owner can't tell the finder, okay, you got a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveida, you bring it to me. No, it's the owner's responsibility to pick it up. If the item was lost in somebody's private house, then now, even if it's the item that you would assume that there was yish, let's say a guest lost the item in my house, even though you would assume that there is yish, I cannot keep it. Why? Because my house acquired it before the yish, even though there's a yish 2 minutes later, before I picked it up. But my house already acquired it, and since my house already acquired it, therefore I have to return it. So if somebody leaves something in your guest room, for example, even if it's a stupid little item, you still have a chiyuv hashava of returning it. Now, included in Hashavas Aveida, by the way, is also preventing loss. There doesn't need to be an item in Hashavas Aveida. So let's say you see the guy's pipe is leaking. You have a mitzvah Hashavas Aveida to tell the guy that his pipe is leaking. Now, if the guy knows his pipe is leaking and he doesn't care enough to deal with it, you don't have to be firmer than him about his money, and you don't have to deal with it if he doesn't want to deal with it. Similar to like unloading your donkey type laws. Yeah? But if the guy doesn't, that's included, somebody's car lights are left on. Mitzvah of Hashavas Aveida to track the guy down and tell him that your car lights are on and your battery is going to go. Once again, when I was talking about old models, that doesn't shut up automatically. Now, there's one big question that you're going to be left with the sugya, and this question we're going to end with. I'm going to try to answer with a couple of tries to answer this. The question is, why don't we see people running around to return cheap items? Yeah. Why? L'maisa, you have a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveida. Why don't we see people? You see a $5 item on the floor, and l'maisa, we don't see the world running around. It's actually ironic.
$5 hefker.
It's not hefker. Mechatesi.
It's $5?
No, $5 item, not a $5 bill. A $5 bill is hefker. But you see people leave some baseball cap or something small, whatever it is, and people don't run after returning it. So let's try the example. Based on the klom that I said, something with a siman, you have a chiyuv of returning it. And even something without a siman, once again, not so pashar. So let's go on. So maybe we had a heter. I'm going to give a couple of tries to why we don't have to return it. You could decide after whether this makes it lichatchila or whether I'm just giving a limud schos on the klal. You could decide how this fits in. One is we had a heter of zakin ve'enu l'chlich vayde. If something's is below your dignity, and the Aruch HaShulchan said it's not just the varden being a Talmid Chacham, anything that's below somebody's dignity, there's no chiyuv of returning. So a lot of the small things that we see, I saw something, a lot of the small things that we see, it might be not beneath people's dignity to start messing around with it. Now, the reason why this is not such a pasha heter is because we only saw that by a specifically dignified person. We didn't necessarily see it by a regular person with a non-dignified item. Secondly, a lot of times, even the small item, this pacifier, We only saw Zakan Levikvadi. It's not his dignity to be holding it and walking around. Is it below his dignity to pick up the item and put it in his pocket? Probably not. And to put up a sign, is that really below his dignity? Now you could say, look, this guy's messing around with trying to find the owner of a pacifier. That might be a below his dignity, but it's a new extension to the din as opposed to the ikr din. So maybe it's a heter, maybe it's not. This is what to debate. Next, when the owner himself wouldn't bother, so neither do I. And that's a din. Now, this is also, sometimes it will help, but sometimes it won't help. I mean, if it's a dirty pacifier, you're right, maybe the owner won't bother anyways. But let's say I saw my baby's sock on the floor. Would I pick it up? Yeah. I mean, if everything's clean, I wouldn't, it's not worth my bother to chase somebody else's baby's sock. But if it was my own baby's sock, I kind of would pick it up. If it got dirty, maybe not. So maybe there's some element of heter there, but it's also, once again, not pashut.
If it's that time, you have to pick it up still?
So once again, I'm trying to add up many heterim. Simply speaking, without my heterim that I'm trying to work on now, the answer would be, yeah, you have to pick it up. I'm working on some heterim. Next is an item that doesn't have simanim. We said that Rav Akiva Eger and Rav Yosha Paskin this way says you do not have to pick up an item without a siman, because you're just going to have to hold it to Eliyahu Navi. You're not going to be able to return it. We said that was a chiddush, but l'maisa that's a din how Rav Yosha Paskins, and we could say maybe the minhag's like this, and therefore nowadays, since items are mass produced, most items do not have a siman. And since most items do not have a siman, maybe that's why the olam isn't so makbid to pick them up. We rely on Rav Yoshev of not picking up items that don't have a siman. So that's actually somewhat of a reasonable point. Next heter, and perhaps working with the Rav Yoshev that we just said, that of not needing to pick up an item that you won't be able to return anyways. Maybe there's a non-sadi that people aren't going to be looking to try to find their cheap item. Meaning, I'm not going to go put up a sign for a $3 item because the guy who lost the $3 item isn't looking for it. And once the guy is not looking for it, then what's the point of me trying to find him if he's not going to look for it? And therefore, it might fit into the din that Rav Yoshev discussed as something that can't be returned. That's not going to be returned. You don't have to pick up. So that was the chiddush that I was thinking of. I wish I heard it from somebody with bigger shoulders, but it's mistaber. Next, for someone who will lose potential profit, we say, technically, Aveida Kodemis. I don't have to pick up something that, if I'm going to lose potential profit. But the Shulchan Aruch had a problem. You're going to get rid of the whole din of Hashavas Aveida. I kind of alluded to this before, and I'll say it again. Perhaps we rely on this by cheap items. Since I'm always in a scenario of potential gain, potential learning, potential doing something important, so maybe we rely on my personal self going before returning somebody else's cheap item. But it's not such a pashut svar, what I just said, but maybe. I'm adding all these svars up. Next, in addition to all the previous svars, if there would be signs up for every little item that was lost, people wouldn't read signs. Imagine you go to shul, and there would be 200 signs from everybody that saw every little stupid thing lying around in every little place, everything that was worth more than a shava pruta. And everybody's picking up, and it wouldn't be beneficial for the world of Hashavas Aveida. It will ruin the whole thing. Nobody's going to check signs anymore. You won't be able to return items. Now, this by itself would certainly not be a good enough svara, because if there's a chiyuv to try to find the owner, there's a chiyuv to try to find the owner. But I'm suggesting, paired with my previous svaras, as to why perhaps there would be no chiyuv Hashavas Aveida. In addition to this, perhaps we could say that's why the olim is not makbid on running after trying to find the owners of small items. You could decide whether this is a heter mamish or it's just a limit schus. But a limit schus, I think it certainly is. And thank you for listening. And we should be zeicha to return all the items that we need to. Hold on all the items that we need to hold on to. And we should be zeicha to bring Eliyahu Navi here to tell us who they go to. Thank you for listening.